welcome back everyone. In part 1, we explored A.K. Ramanujan's poem Self-Portrait, along with its setting, tone and gender analysis. Now, in part 2, we will look closely at its major themes, that is, identity crisis, alienation, tradition versus modernity, patriarchal influence and the tension between past as present, as well as the key literary devices that enrich its meaning. Let's begin. The key themes in poem Self-Portrait. A.K. Ramanujan's Self-Portrait is a layered exploration of the fractured self in a post-colonial context. Through its evocative imagery, the poem examines identity crisis, alienation and disconnection, tradition versus modernity and patriarchal influence, the tension between past and present. Together, these themes reveal how the search for selfhood is shaped and often unsettled by ancestry, cultural memory, and the demands of modern life. Let's begin by exploring these themes in detail. Number 1 theme is identity crisis. The poem Self-Portrait begins with the unsettling line, "I resemble everyone but myself," and sometimes see in shop windows despite the well-known laws of optics. The portrait of a stranger, date unknown, often signed in a corner by my father. At once, the poet introduces the central paradox of selfhood. The speaker recognizes his presence, yet cannot affirm his individuality. The declaration, "I resemble everyone but myself," encapsulates the fractured nature of identity, dissolving the uniqueness of the self into a collective resemblance. Instead of self-recognition, the poet encounters a dispersal of identity, a condition where he is defined by others, but unable to grasp his own distinct essence. This sense of disorientation is not merely personal, but reflective of the larger post-colonial condition in which the subject is perpetually displaced, torn between competing inheritances. This sense of displacement intensifies in the closing image, where the reflection is signed in a corner by my father. The father's signature functions as a metaphor for the burden of ancestry, tradition, and inherited identity. The speaker realizes that his sense of self is not freely authored, but already inscribed by cultural expectations and familial authority. In post-colonial societies, this inherited mark can be both grounding and suffocating. It anchors a subject in tradition, yet also restricts the possibility of autonomous selfhood. The father's signature then becomes the emblem of a past that refuses to let go, binding the subject to memory, lineage, and obligation, while denying him the freedom to articulate a new identity. The juxtaposition of laws of optics in the father's signature is particularly telling. The laws of optics symbolize modern nationality and the certainties of Western science, while the father's mark stands for tradition, ancestry, and cultural inheritance. Yet both frameworks fail to offer clarity. The rational structures of modernity cannot revolve the poet's existential dislocation, and the inherited weight of tradition offers only a borrowed name, not an authentic self. The subject is caught between these two orders of meaning, unable to claim wholeness in either. Homi K. Bhabha would describe this condition as existing in the third space of hybridity, where the post-colonial self inhabits the intersects of cultures, neither fully at home in modernity nor tradition, belonging to both, yet excluded from each. In this sense, Ramanujan's identity crisis is not simply psychological, but profoundly historical and cultural. The colonial encounter fractured the integrity of cultural selfhood, leaving behind subjects who were compelled to negotiate between the authority of Western modernity and the inherited claims of tradition. The poet himself, living between India and the United States, embodies this diasporic in-betweenness. His mirror reveals not a coherent individual, but fragments of competing worlds, each marking him, none wholly his own. Number second theme is alienation and disconnection. Alienation in self-portrait is one of the most striking dimensions, for the speaker confesses, I resemble everyone but myself. Instead of finding assurance in his reflection, he confronts estrangement. The self does not appear as familiar, but dissolves into a collective resemblance, leaving him displaced in his own skin. To see oneself as everyone but myself dramatizes a deep psychological split where individuality is lost and intimacy with one's own identity becomes impossible. This estrangement is sharpened in the unsettling description of the reflection as the portrait of a stranger, date unknown. A portrait ordinarily meant to preserve identity here erases it, turning the self into something unfamiliar and historically disconnected. The phrase date unknown implies that the subject has been severed from his own cultural past, suggesting a rupture in historical continuity. In postcolonial terms, this reflects how colonialism disrupts memory and belonging, leaving the subject unanchored, alienated, not only from the present, but also from the ancestral times. Fanon's analysis of colonial alienation sharpens this reading. For him, the colonized self perceives itself through the colonizer's gaze, resulting in estrangement from one's own image. The poet enacts this fracture when his reflection returns not himself, but of a stranger. Alienation in the poem is therefore not accidental, but structural, produced by historical displacement, cultural hybridity, and psychological rupture. The poem captures the condition of a self that cannot belong fully to either side of its inheritance, condemned to encounter estrangement even in the mirror. The third theme is tradition versus modernity. In self-portrait, poet dramatizes the struggle between tradition and modernity through the image of the father's signature on the reflection. This signature symbolizes ancestry, heritage, and cultural authority that predetermines identity before the individual can claim it. While tradition offers continuity and rootedness, it also functions as a constraint, binding the speaker to a history he did not choose. Identity, in this sense, is inherited rather than freely authored, leaving the self both grounded and burdened. Yet modern frameworks prove equally unfulfilling. The reference to the well-known laws of optics gestures towards science and rationality, systems expected to guarantee self-recognition. But in the mirror, these laws fail. The poet still sees the portrait of a stranger. Instead of producing clarity, modernity only deepens estrangement, exposing the inadequacy of rational Western categories in capturing the complexities of postcolonial identity. The self remains fractured, suspended between ancestral inscription and modern autonomy. From a postcolonial perspective, this conflict reflects the condition of hybrid societies negotiating between cultural memory and global modernity. The father's mark anchors the self in tradition, while the failure of optics dramatizes the insufficiency of Western rationality for colonized or diasporic subjects. Ramanujan shows that identity cannot be fully secured by either inheritance or modern science. Rather, it is formed in the uneasy tension between them. The poem thus presents tradition and modernity, not as stable foundations, but as forces that both shape and unsettle the self. Number 4 theme is patriarchal influence. In self-portrait, the father's signature operates as a metaphor for patriarchal dominance in shaping identity. Our signature signifies ownership and authorship. And here it suggests that the speaker's sense of self is not self-authored, but inherited. The poet does not discover individuality in his reflection. Instead, he encounters the mark of male authority, which predetermines his role within the family and culture. The placement of the signature in a corner is significant. It is marginal, yet permanent, quietly inscribing identity in ways that cannot be erased. This reflects how patriarchy often works, not through direct force, but through subtle inherited codes that shape a person's selfhood before they can define themselves. Even in the act of self-recognition, the speaker finds himself overshadowed by his father's legacy, reminding us that individuality in such structures is always filtered through paternal authority. From a postcolonial perspective, the father's signature resonates with the broader condition of inherited dominance. Just as colonial subjects found their identities scripted by the imperial powers, individuals within patriarchal systems inherit roles shaped by male authority. Ramanujan thus exposes a double bind. The speaker's alienation stems not only from his personal struggle, but also from systemic forces, patriarchy and colonialism, that deny him full autonomy. The father's mark validates identity, but at the cost of originality and freedom. Fifth theme is past and present. In the poem, the poet dramatizes the difficulty of reconciling past and present in identity formation. The portrait of a stranger, date unknown, reflects a rupture in continuity, where ancestry and memory no longer secure the self in time. This loss of connection leaves the speaker suspended between what he inherits and what he seeks to define anew. The father's signature stands for tradition and heritage, which, though necessary, also weighs heavily on individuality. Meanwhile, the speaker's search for his reflection shows his longing for present authenticity. Ramanujan suggests that identity cannot be built by choosing one over the other, for neglecting the past leads to rootlessness, while ignoring the present suffocates selfhood. Viewed through a postcolonial lens, this tension mirrors the struggles of hybrid societies negotiating between ancestral legacies and modern realities. The mirror that reveals a stranger dramatizes the dislocation of a self shaped by both traditions and colonial inheritances. Identity, Ramanujan implies, is not a fixed essence, but an ongoing process of weaving past and present into fragile coherence. Let's move to the literary or poetic devices. Poetic devices are the tools used to create a poem more rhythmic, enhance a poem's meaning, or intensify a mood or a feeling. A list of poetic devices used in the poem are: number 1, alliteration. Alliteration, such as "sometimes see," creates a soft, hesitant rhythm that mirrors the act of tentative self-examination. The repetition of the symbol S sound suggests slipperiness and uncertainty, reflecting how the poet's self-image continually escapes stable recognition. This instability mirrors the post-colonial subject's wavering identity, always caught between multiple cultural frameworks. Number 2 is imagery. Ramanujan's imagery is both visual and psychological. Phrases like "the portrait of a stranger" evoke the uncanny dissonance of seeing one's own reflection as foreign. The line, "often signed in a corner," conjures an artwork stamped by paternal authority, showing how identity is framed by ancestry. These images embody alienation, making the fractured self both visible and palpable. Such imagery illustrates how colonized subjects often perceive themselves through imposed external images rather than authentic self-recognition. Number third is metaphor. The word portrait is a central metaphor for identity, not naturally discovered, but artificially constructed, inherited, and inscribed. The line, "I resemble everyone but myself," turns the self into a blurred copy of others, emphasizing the erasure of individuality. This metaphor captures hybridity and displacement. Identity becomes a sleek of tradition, colonial legacies, and cultural fragments. Number 4 is paradox. The statement, "I resemble everyone but myself," is paradoxical. Resemblance usually assures recognition, yet here it produces estrangement. This paradox expresses the unsettling truth of fractured identity, rooted in many influences but never fully one's own. This reflects the paradox of postcolonial identity. One is both shaped by cultural inheritance and estranged from it. Number 5 is irony. One would expect a mirror to reveal the true self, but the speaker here sees only a stranger. The irony highlights the gap between expectation and reality, intensifying the theme of alienation. The irony reflects the condition of diasporic subjects who, even in moments of self-reflection, confront an identity over-determined by history, colonial discourse, and tradition. Number 6 is symbolism. The portrait symbolizes self-image mediated by external forces, while the father's signature symbolizes patriarchy and ancestral authority. Together, they show how identity is inherited, inscribed, and constrained by history, rather than freely authored. These symbols reflect how colonized or diasporic identities are marked by patriarchal and colonial legacies that dictate belonging. Number 7 is juxtaposition. The poem juxtaposes objectivity with subjectivity. The laws of optics imply scientific certainty, yet the reflection reveals only estrangement. Likewise, the opposition between myself and everyone exposes the gulf between individuality and collective identity. Such juxtapositions capture the in-betweenness of postcolonial identity, caught between rational modernity and inherited tradition, individuality and collectivity. In short, Ramanujan uses a minimal but powerful set of devices: alliteration, imagery, metaphor, paradox, irony, symbolism, and juxtaposition to create a poem that feels deceptively simple, yet expresses the profound crisis of identity. Let's move to the conclusion. In conclusion, Self-Portrait is a simple yet deeply layered poem that captures the complexities of identity, alienation, and self-perception in a modern and post-colonial context. Through subtle use of imagery, metaphor, paradox, Ramanujan portrays the speaker's disorienting realization that his individuality is obscured by inherited tradition, patriarchal authority, and collective resemblance. The poem reflects the universal human struggle to reconcile past and present, tradition and modernity, the personal and the imposed. By presenting the self as both a mirror and a stranger, Ramanujan underscores the fragile and fragmented nature of identity, revealing how one's sense of self is often shaped less by personal autonomy than by external, cultural, and familial forces. Ultimately, the poem challenges readers to confront the unsettling truth that selfhood is not always self-created, but emerges from a complex negotiation between memory, inheritance, and the shifting realities of the present. That's it for today. Thank you so much. I will see you all in the discussion forum. Thank you.